The struggling waitress covered the meal for the lonely widow, not knowing she just fed her future mother-in-law. The simple act of kindness seemed insignificant at the time, just another small moment in Ellie Morgan's exhausting day of carrying plates and forcing smiles. But as she watched the elderly woman's eyes soften with surprise, something in the universe shifted, setting wheels in motion that neither woman could have possibly imagined. Ellie's feet ached as she moved between tables at Rosie's Diner, a worn-down establishment on the edge of Millfield, where the vinyl seats had long since cracked and the neon sign flickered inconsistently in the evening fog. 6 months ago, she'd imagined this job would be temporary, just something to keep her afloat after the art gallery she'd worked at closed down, another casualty of the changing neighborhood. Now, with rent due in 3 days and her bank account hovering dangerously close to empty, temporary had begun to feel alarmingly permanent. "Order up." Frank, the cook, called from the kitchen window, his voice barely audible over the clatter of dishes and the soft country music playing from the ancient radio behind the counter. Ellie tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear and collected the plate. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Nothing fancy, but prepared with Frank's particular brand of care. She carried it to table 7, where the elderly woman sat alone, staring out the rain-streaked window at the parking lot's puddles reflecting the diner's lights. "Here you go, ma'am. Meatloaf special." Ellie set the plate down gently. The woman turned, her eyes, a striking clear blue, seeming to take a moment to focus. "Oh, thank you, dear." Her voice was soft, cultured, with an underlying weariness that Ellie recognized all too well. Something about the woman tugged at Ellie's heart. Perhaps it was the wedding ring still adorning her left hand despite the absence of a husband, or the way she'd been methodically folding and refolding her napkin while waiting. Or maybe it was simply that in this woman's solitude, Ellie saw a reflection of her own isolation in this town, where she'd moved for a relationship that had disintegrated like wet tissue paper. Throughout the next hour, as the dinner rush ebbed and flowed, Ellie found her gaze drifting back to the widow. The woman ate slowly, cutting each bite of meatloaf with precision, occasionally pausing to dab at her lips with her napkin. Not once did she check a phone or read a book. She simply ate, occasionally looking out at the rain as if waiting for someone who would never arrive. When the woman finally requested her check, Ellie hesitated before bringing it over. On impulse, the kind her mother would have called reckless and her ex would have criticized as naive, she marked the bill as paid. "It's been taken care of," Ellie said, placing the receipt face down on the table. The woman's eyebrows drew together in confusion. "I don't understand. It's on the house tonight." Ellie felt warmth creep into her cheeks. She wasn't supposed to do this, but Frank wouldn't mind. He'd covered for employees' free meals before, and Ellie would make it up on her next paycheck somehow. But why? The woman's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the receipt, turning it over to confirm what Ellie had said. Ellie shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Just because. Everyone deserves a kindness sometimes." For a moment, the woman said nothing, and Ellie worried she'd somehow offended her. Then she saw the glimmer of moisture in those blue eyes. "That's..." The woman's voice caught. She cleared her throat. "That's very kind. Especially when..." Her gaze flickered to Ellie's worn sneakers, the small coffee stain on her uniform. "Well, thank you." "You're welcome, Mrs. Reynolds." Margaret Reynolds. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face, smoothing away the lines of solitude. "But most people call me Maggie." "Nice to meet you properly, Maggie." "I'm Ellie." "Ellie." Maggie repeated the name as if testing it. "Short for Eleanor?" "Elizabeth, actually." "But I've been Ellie since I was little." Maggie nodded, gathering her purse. "My son's name is James. Everyone calls him Jamie, though he's been trying to get people to stop since he turned 30. A fond smile flickered across her face, then faded. "I haven't seen him in almost 2 years." The confession hung in the air between them, unexpected and heavy with unspoken grief. "I'm sorry," Ellie said, meaning it. Maggie waved a hand dismissively, though her eyes betrayed her. "Life happens. He moved to Chicago for work. I stayed here after Robert, my husband, passed. We talk on the phone sometimes, but..." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "Anyway, thank you again for the meal, Ellie." It was the highlight of an otherwise difficult day. As Maggie stood to leave, she pressed something into Ellie's hand, a $20 bill, nearly twice the cost of the meal. "I can't..." Ellie began to protest. "Not for the diner," Maggie said firmly. "For you. Buy yourself something pretty. A small indulgence. Before Ellie could object further, the older woman squeezed her hand once and walked out, disappearing into the rainy night. Ellie watched through the window as Maggie hurried to her car, an older model sedan, meticulously maintained. The taillights glowed red through the rain as the car pulled away, leaving Ellie with a $20 bill and an odd feeling that something significant had just occurred, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what. "You paid for her meal?" Frank's voice came from behind her. Ellie turned, expecting disapproval, but found only curiosity in the cook's weathered face. "I'll cover it on payday," she promised. Frank shook his head. "Don't worry about it. Not the first time you've done something like this." He wiped his hands on his apron. "You're a good kid, Ellie. World needs more like you." She pocketed the 20, feeling both grateful and slightly ashamed. She wasn't a saint, just someone who recognized loneliness when she saw it. And right now, she needed that 20 more than she needed the warm glow of having done something kind. That night, as rain drummed against the thin roof of her one-bedroom apartment, Ellie counted out her tips on the kitchen counter. $67.35 plus Maggie's 20. Not enough for rent, not nearly, but maybe enough to keep the electricity on. She separated the bills into neat piles: rent, utilities, groceries, and tried not to think about how quickly they disappeared, how little remained for anything resembling a future. On her refrigerator, held by a magnet from a city she'd never visited, hung a brochure for the community college's art program. She'd picked it up weeks ago, during a moment of optimism that had faded as quickly as it had arrived. Now she stared at it, wondering if dreams were luxuries only afforded to people with safety nets. Across town, in a house too large for one person, Maggie Reynolds sat at her kitchen table with a cup of cooling tea, looking at old photographs spread before her like tarot cards revealing a life already lived. Her fingers traced the outline of her son's face in a graduation photo, his smile confident, his future bright. Beside it lay a more recent picture, sent in a Christmas card, Jamie standing before the Chicago skyline, his arm around a colleague, both in business suits. "I met someone kind today," she said aloud to the empty room, a habit formed after 2 years of speaking to walls and memories. "She reminded me of you, Robert, that same impulsive generosity." Outside, the rain continued to fall, connecting the two women in its gentle percussion. A widow haunted by absence, a waitress burdened by uncertainty, neither aware that their brief encounter had set something in motion that would change both their lives irrevocably. 2 weeks passed. April showers gave way to the first tentative warmth of May, and Ellie found herself working a double shift on a Sunday, her day off sacrificed to cover for a coworker with the flu. The diner hummed with the after-church crowd, families and couples enjoying late breakfasts, the clinking of silverware creating a familiar symphony. When the bell above the door chimed shortly after noon, Ellie barely glanced up from refilling coffee cups. It wasn't until she turned to greet the new customer that she recognized Maggie Reynolds, this time accompanied by a tall man whose features held echoes of the older woman's refined bone structure. "Ellie!" Maggie's face brightened with recognition. "How wonderful to see you again." "Maggie, hi." Ellie smiled, genuinely pleased to see the widow looking more animated than during her solitary visit. "Table for two? Please." Maggie gestured to her companion. "This is my son, Jamie. He's visiting from Chicago." Jamie Reynolds extended his hand, his grip firm but not overpowering. "James, actually," he corrected with a good-natured sigh that suggested this was a long-standing point of contention. "Mom refuses to accept I'm no longer 5 years old." "You'll always be my Jamie," Maggie said with fond exasperation, patting his arm. Ellie led them to a booth by the window, the same one Maggie had occupied during her previous visit. As she handed them menus, she noticed the easy affection between mother and son, the way Jamie pulled out Maggie's chair, the gentle teasing in their interaction. Whatever distance had existed between them seemed to have diminished, at least for this visit. "Your waitress told me about you," Maggie said to Jamie as Ellie poured water into their glasses. "About how you covered my meal that night. It was so thoughtful." Jamie looked confused. "What meal?" "Oh, not you." Maggie laughed. "Ellie here? She paid for my dinner when I was having a particularly difficult evening a couple weeks ago." Jamie's gaze shifted to Ellie, really seeing her for the first time. His eyes were the same striking blue as his mother's, but with tiny flecks of gray around the pupils. "That was kind of you," he said, his voice warm with appreciation. "Mom mentioned it when we spoke on the phone. I think it meant more to her than just the meal. Ellie felt heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't a big deal, she mumbled, suddenly conscious of her wrinkled uniform and the pencil stuck behind her ear. It was to me, Maggie said simply. There was an awkward moment of silence before Ellie cleared her throat. So what can I get you folks to drink? As she took their orders and moved between tables, Ellie found herself increasingly aware of Jamie Reynolds. He listened attentively when his mother spoke, laughed easily, and thanked each server who refilled his coffee. During a lull, she overheard fragments of their conversation. Something about Jamie possibly relocating his work from Chicago, Maggie expressing cautious hope about having him closer. When she brought their food, Jamie asked, "So, Ellie, are you from Millfield originally?" The question, though simple, caught her off guard. Customers rarely showed interest in the lives of those who served them. "No, I moved here about a year ago," she answered, balancing an empty tray against her hip. "From Portland." "For the thriving cultural scene, no doubt," Jamie said with a teasing smile that indicated he was well aware of Millfield's limited attractions. Ellie found herself smiling back. "For a relationship that didn't work out. But the affordable rent convinced me to stay." "Jamie works in architectural restoration," Maggie interjected proudly. "He's considering opening a satellite office here. The historical district has several buildings worth saving." "Mom," Jamie protested mildly, "I'm sure Ellie has other tables to attend to." "Actually," Ellie said, glancing at the now quieter diner, "things are slowing down. The historical district could definitely use some attention. The old theater on Main has been boarded up for years. It's a shame. It has the most beautiful Art Deco details." Jamie's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine engagement. "You know about Art Deco architecture?" "I studied art history before life. Took a different turn." She shrugged, trying to keep her tone light. "I still sketch the old buildings around town sometimes." "Really?" Jamie leaned forward. "I'd love to see—" "Order up!" Frank's voice interrupted from the kitchen. "Duty calls," Ellie said, relieved and disappointed in equal measure. "Enjoy your meal." As she walked away, she felt Jamie's gaze following her. It wasn't the appraising look she sometimes got from male customers, the kind that made her skin crawl. Rather, it felt like genuine interest, as if he'd recognized something in her worth knowing better. When they finished their meal, Jamie insisted on paying despite Maggie's protests. As Ellie brought their change, he handed her a business card. "If you ever want to show me those sketches," he said, "or if you're interested in seeing some of the restoration plans for the historical district. No pressure." The card was simple, elegant. James Reynolds, Architectural Preservation Specialist. Below that, a Chicago phone number and email address. "Thanks," Ellie said, tucking the card into her pocket. "I might do that." After they left, she found a generous tip and a note scrawled on the back of the receipt. "Kindness circles back. Thank you for being there for my mother, J.R." That evening, as she sorted through the day's tips, Ellie found herself studying Jamie's business card. On impulse, she retrieved her sketchbook from beneath a pile of unpaid bills and flipped to a drawing she'd done of the abandoned theater, its once grand facade still showing hints of its former glory despite the decay. Taking a deep breath, she snapped a photo of the sketch and sent it to the email address on the card with a simple message: "The theater I mentioned. It deserves another chance. Ellie." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then set her phone aside, telling herself it didn't matter if he responded or not. Yet she found herself checking for notifications more often than usual as the evening wore on. Just as she was preparing for bed, her phone chimed with an incoming email. "Beautiful work," Jamie had written. "You've captured the soul of the building. I'm meeting with the Historical Society tomorrow at 2 p.m. to discuss potential projects. Would you consider joining us? Your perspective would be valuable." Ellie stared at the message, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. She had the afternoon shift tomorrow. There was no way she could make a 2 p.m. meeting. Yet something about this opportunity felt important, like a door opening to a future she'd begun to believe was permanently closed to her. Before she could talk herself out of it, she texted her coworker, Danny, "Can you cover my shift tomorrow afternoon? I'll take your Saturday night." The response came quickly. "Saturday night, and you bring me coffee before my morning shift Friday." "Deal," Ellie typed back, smiling at the negotiation. To Jamie, she wrote, "I'll be there. Where should I meet you?" As spring deepened its hold on Millfield, bringing vibrant green to the parks and coaxing flowers from once barren planters along Main Street, Ellie found herself swept into a whirlwind of unexpected possibilities. What had begun as a simple meeting with the Historical Society evolved into a consulting role, with Jamie valuing her artistic eye and knowledge of the town's architectural gems. She continued working at Rosie's Diner, but now there was something else too. Afternoons spent walking through abandoned buildings with Jamie, identifying original features worth preserving, her sketchbook filled with new drawings that served a purpose beyond her own pleasure. "You see things differently," Jamie told her one evening as they sat on the steps of the courthouse, reviewing plans for the theater renovation that had just received preliminary approval. "Where others see decay, you see potential. Isn't that what you do too?" she asked, looking up from a sketch of the theater's proposed new marquee. He considered this, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across his face. "I suppose, but I approach it technically first. You go straight to the heart." Their professional relationship had developed an easy rhythm, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of something Ellie hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. The way her pulse quickened when Jamie's hand brushed hers as they examined blueprints, how she found herself selecting her outfit more carefully on days they were scheduled to meet, the disappointed hollowness she felt when he had to return to Chicago for days at a time. It was Maggie who finally brought it into the open. She had become a regular at the diner, often stopping by during Ellie's shifts for coffee and conversation. On this particular afternoon, as the lunch rush subsided, she watched Ellie wiping down tables with unusual intensity. "You care for him, don't you?" Maggie asked abruptly. Ellie froze, the rag suspended mid-wipe. "I'm sorry? Jamie." Maggie's eyes were kind but knowing. "I see how you look at him when you think no one's watching." Heat flooded Ellie's face. "We're colleagues," she managed, focusing intently on a non-existent spot on the table. "Of course," Maggie agreed too readily. "And he speaks very highly of your professional contributions." Ellie risked a glance at the older woman, whose expression held not judgment, but a gentle understanding that made denial seem pointless. "It wouldn't matter anyway," Ellie said quietly. "He's establishing a satellite office here, but his life is in Chicago. And I'm just—" She gestured to her uniform, the diner around them. "Just what?" Maggie challenged. "Just a talented artist with an eye for beauty and a heart kind enough to buy dinner for a lonely old woman?" She reached across the table, covering Ellie's hand with her own. "My late husband was a janitor when we met. I was finishing my master's degree. My parents were horrified." A smile played at her lips. "We were married 42 years. "That's different," Ellie protested. "Is it?" Maggie squeezed her hand once before releasing it. "Jamie's coming back from Chicago tomorrow. He mentioned the theater project has hit some bureaucratic snag. Perhaps you could meet him for dinner to discuss it. I'd offer to cook, but my arthritis has been acting up." The transparent matchmaking should have been embarrassing, but Ellie found herself fighting a smile. "Maggie Reynolds, are you meddling?" "Absolutely not," Maggie declared with dignity. "I'm simply facilitating professional collaboration while managing my chronic health condition." She winked, dropping all pretense. "He'll be at Antonio's at 7. That nice Italian place on Elm Street." "I never agreed to this," Ellie pointed out, though her heart had already begun racing at the prospect. "Then don't go." Maggie shrugged, gathering her purse. "But wear that green dress if you do. The one you had on when you came by to help me move my patio furniture last weekend. It brings out your eyes." After Maggie left, Ellie stood staring at the half-wiped table, caught between exasperation and a bubbling hope she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Antonio's was busy for a Thursday night, the small restaurant filled with the gentle clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversation beneath the soft Italian music playing through hidden speakers. Ellie arrived 5 minutes early, the green dress smoothed nervously beneath her trembling fingers as she gave Jamie's name to the host. "Ah, yes, Mr. Reynolds is already seated," the young man said, leading her to a corner table where Jamie stood as she approached. His eyes widened slightly as they traveled from her face to the dress and back again. "Ellie, you look—" He seemed to search for the right word. "Different. Good different," he clarified quickly. "I'm just used to seeing you in work clothes or jeans." A dress felt appropriate for Antonio's, she said, settling into the chair he held out for her. "I'm glad you could make it on such short notice. Mom mentioned she ran into you at the diner and told you about the zoning issue we've hit with the theater project." Ellie bit back a smile. So that was the pretext Maggie had used. Yes, she mentioned something about that. Throughout the appetizer, they discussed the theater renovation, a genuine problem with the historical designation that required some creative problem-solving. By the time their entrees arrived, however, the conversation had drifted to more personal territory. "So why architecture?" Ellie asked, twirling pasta around her fork. "What drew you to preservation specifically?" Jamie considered the question as he sipped his wine. "I was always fascinated by buildings as a kid. The way they tell stories about the people who built them, the times they were built in." He set his glass down, tracing its stem with his finger. "After my dad died, Mom and I almost lost our house. Financial issues. There was talk of selling it to developers who wanted to tear it down for condos. What happened? A local preservation society stepped in. The house had historical significance. It was designed by a protege of Frank Lloyd Wright. They helped us find a way to keep it, designated as a landmark." His eyes took on a distant quality. "I remember thinking that houses hold more than people. They hold memories, moments. Preserving them means those stories don't disappear." The personal revelation shifted something between them, opening a door to deeper understanding. "What about you?" Jamie asked. "How does a talented artist end up waiting tables in Millfield?" Ellie tensed slightly. This was the part of her story she typically glossed over, the chapter marked by failure and retreat. But something about Jamie's openness invited reciprocity. "I had a plan," she began, her finger tracing the condensation on her water glass. "Art history degree, internship at a prestigious gallery in Portland, eventual curatorial position." She smiled ruefully. "Then the gallery downsized. My boyfriend at the time got a job offer here, and I followed, thinking it was temporary. When things fell apart between us, I was too broke to move back, too stubborn to admit defeat. And now?" She met his gaze directly. "Now I'm starting to think getting stuck here wasn't the worst thing that could have happened." The intensity in his eyes as he looked at her made her breath catch. "I'm starting to think the same thing," he said quietly. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of shared stories, discovered connections, and a growing awareness that whatever was developing between them had roots deeper than either had realized. When Jamie insisted on walking her home, the night air cool against her bare arms, Ellie felt a sense of possibility unfurling within her chest. At her apartment door, he hesitated. "I should tell you something," he said, his expression suddenly serious. "I'm not just opening a satellite office here. I'm relocating permanently. The Chicago office will become the satellite." "What? Why?" "I thought it was always the plan eventually," he explained. "Mom's getting older. After Dad died, I promised myself I wouldn't leave her alone forever. But there's another reason now." His gaze held hers. "Someone made me see this town differently. See possibilities I hadn't noticed before." The moment hung between them, fragile as spun glass. "Jamie," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. He stepped closer, his hand gentle against her cheek. "May I?" he whispered. Her answer was to lean forward, closing the distance between them as his lips met hers in a kiss that felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. Summer bloomed across Millfield, painting the town in vibrant hues that seemed to mirror the transformation in Ellie's life. The theater renovation project had broken ground, with Ellie officially hired as a creative consultant, her art history background and eye for detail proving invaluable. She'd reduced her hours at the diner to part-time, the first step toward a career path she'd thought permanently closed to her. More significant than the professional changes, however, was the personal metamorphosis. Her relationship with Jamie had deepened over the intervening months, each discovering in the other a kindred spirit who understood the importance of both preserving the past and building something new. Maggie, for her part, watched their blossoming romance with barely concealed satisfaction, though she maintained the fiction that she'd had nothing to do with bringing them together. "Pure coincidence that I happened to be at the diner that night," she insisted one Sunday afternoon as the three of them worked in her garden, preparing it for the summer vegetables she planned to grow. "Divine intervention, perhaps." "Divine intervention wearing a blue cardigan and asking specifically for my section," Ellie teased, patting soil around a tomato seedling. Maggie sniffed dramatically. "I simply recognized two lonely souls who might understand each other." Jamie, kneeling nearby with a trowel, exchanged an amused glance with Ellie. "And the fact that you've been not so subtly hinting about grandchildren since our third date? A mother can dream," Maggie said primly, then broke into laughter at their matching expressions of alarm. "Oh, relax, both of you. I'm perfectly content watching you restore old buildings together for now." Later that evening, as Jamie drove Ellie home, a comfortable silence settled between them. The windows were down, the warm air carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and distant rain. "Move in with me," Jamie said suddenly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Ellie turned to look at him, wondering if she'd misheard. "What?" "Move in with me," he repeated, glancing at her briefly before returning his attention to driving. "The renovation on my place is almost finished." "It makes sense. You're there most evenings anyway, and your apartment is a shoebox with questionable plumbing," she finished for him, a smile tugging at her lips. "Very romantic proposal." He laughed, reaching for her hand across the console. "I could try again with candlelight and flowers if you prefer." "No," she said, lacing her fingers through his. "This is perfect. Yes, I'll move in with you." The simple exchange belied the magnitude of what it represented. Not just a change of address, but a commitment to building something together, a future neither had imagined possible a year earlier. As summer gave way to fall, and the theater renovation progressed toward completion, Ellie found herself standing on the scaffolding one crisp October afternoon, carefully restoring a section of decorative plasterwork that had been covered by decades of paint and neglect. Below, Jamie was speaking with the construction foreman, their voices carrying up to where she worked. She paused, brush suspended mid-stroke, to watch him, his animated gestures as he explained a detail of the design, the way he listened intently to the foreman's concerns. In moments like these, witnessing his passion for preservation, his respect for both the buildings and the people who worked on them, she felt a surge of emotion so powerful it sometimes left her breathless. "You're staring," came an amused voice from beside her. Lisa, one of the restoration artists, had climbed up to join her. "Just admiring the view?" Ellie admitted without embarrassment. "Can't blame you there," Lisa said with a grin. "You two are the real deal, aren't you?" "It's kind of disgustingly cute," Ellie laughed, returning her attention to the delicate scroll work beneath her fingers. "We're happy," she said simply. "Thanks to his mom," Lisa added, selecting a fine-tipped brush from her kit. At Ellie's surprised look, she explained, "Jamie told me how you met, how you covered his mother's meal at the diner, and she orchestrated your reunion. It's like something from a movie." "He told you that?" Lisa nodded. "When we were working late last week, he said it was the luckiest moment of his life, that his mother happened to eat at your diner that night." Something warm unfurled in Ellie's chest at the thought of Jamie sharing their story, acknowledging the serendipity that had brought them together. That evening, as they walked home together through streets painted gold and crimson with autumn leaves, Ellie recounted her conversation with Lisa. "So I'm just a story you tell coworkers now?" she teased. Jamie squeezed her hand. "The best story. How a struggling waitress with a heart of gold changed my life by feeding my mother." "When you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous." "The best things often do." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Which reminds me." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Ellie's heart seemed to stop, then restart at double speed. "Jamie," she whispered, her voice caught somewhere between question and wonder. He didn't kneel. Instead, he held the box in his open palm, offering it to her like a gift she was free to accept or decline. "I had a whole speech planned," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "About how you showed me that restoration isn't just about buildings, but about people too. About how loving you has made me see everything differently." He opened the box, revealing a vintage ring with a small diamond surrounded by sapphires. "But maybe what matters most is simply this. I love you, Ellie Morgan. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to narrow to this moment, the golden light of autumn surrounding them, the man she loved offering her a future they would build together, restoration experts creating something both new and respectful of what had come before. "Yes," she said, joy bubbling up through happy tears. "Of course, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, Ellie thought of that rainy night at the diner, of a simple act of kindness offered to a lonely widow. How could she have known then that in feeding a stranger, she was setting the table for her own future happiness? The grand reopening of the Millfield Theater took place on a snowy evening in December, the restored marquee glowing against the dark winter sky. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished brass and restored murals, while the auditorium's ornate ceiling once again displayed the celestial scene that had awed moviegoers nearly a century earlier. For Ellie, walking through the space that had once been abandoned and forgotten, now vibrant with life and conversation, felt like a physical manifestation of her own transformation. From the forgotten waitress to a woman with purpose, from loneliness to belonging, from struggle to hope. "Are you ready?" Jamie appeared at her side, handsome in a suit she'd helped him select for the occasion. Almost. She straightened his tie, a familiar gesture that had become part of their shared language. "Where's Maggie? She should be here for the ribbon cutting. She's in the front row, saving our seats and probably telling everyone within earshot that her future daughter-in-law restored those ceiling murals single-handedly." Ellie laughed, picturing it perfectly. Only a slight exaggeration. As they made their way toward the stage where the mayor waited to begin the ceremony, Ellie caught sight of Maggie in the crowd, elegant in a blue dress that matched her eyes, beaming with pride as she spotted them. Beside her sat Frank from the diner, and several other familiar faces from both their lives, gathered to witness not just the rebirth of a building, but the culmination of a journey that had begun with a simple meal. "I still can't believe this all started because I couldn't bear to watch someone eat alone," Ellie murmured as they took their places for the ceremony. Jamie's hand found hers, his thumb brushing over the engagement ring that sparkled in the theater's lights. "A single act of kindness," he said softly. "Who knows how many lives it changes?" As the mayor called them forward and the crowd applauded, Ellie felt the full circle of her journey, from the struggling waitress who had covered a meal for a lonely widow to the woman who now stood proudly beside her future husband and mother-in-law, surrounded by community, purpose, and love. Some might call it coincidence, others divine intervention, but in her heart, Ellie knew it for what it was. Proof that even in our darkest moments, a simple act of kindness can open doors we never knew existed, leading us home to the lives and loves we were meant to find all along.